Frosted Windowpanes, a Nature's Fury and Delights novelette, written by Leenie Brown, narrated by Christopher, an authorised voice replica. Chapter 1. Patrick Mullins flipped up his collar and pulled it closer around his neck. There was a definite December bite to the evening air. But he was in no hurry to escape it, as some others seemed to be. He stepped to the side as a pair of ladies dressed in woolen coats, attempting to escape the chill, hurried past him, clinging closely to each other. A man, moving at a steady pace, neither hurried nor relaxed, and carrying a small crate on his shoulder, passed with a cheerful "Pardon me," before he continued whistling a tune, each note being made visible by the chilly air. The light from lanterns, recently lit by a faithful lamplighter, created pools of light here and there along the high street, and chased away all the shadows that dared creep near the edge of their light-filled pools. To Patrick it was a cheery, welcoming sight. How he had missed this! This was home, and no matter what painful memories this place might hold, it was where he belonged. He would not leave again. When he had first received the news of his brother's accident, he had thought he would be coming back here only to dispose of some property, in such a fashion as to secure himself a life of relative ease elsewhere. Anywhere but here. However, he had had ample time to consider his future during his voyage. Ashmore Lodge called to him, and he could not deny it. It was where generations of ancestors resided in portraits, and lived on in stories handed down from one generation to the next. He could not dispose of his family. He had left them 4 years ago, but not because he had wanted to. No, he had left them out of necessity. As a second son, his lot in life was to earn his fortune. He had written to his brother and mother faithfully. Though he had been absent when both had been called to the life beyond this one, he had never turned his back on them, and he would not now. He thanked the lad who brought him his horse and swung himself up into the saddle. He had considered staying at the Rose and Crown tonight and making his way to Ashmore Lodge in the morning, but he smiled to himself. He had never been a patient man, so instead he had availed himself of a hearty meal and a stout pint of ale, and was now set to make the short journey to Ashmore Lodge a day ahead of schedule. Mr. Mullins, Patrick turned toward the person who called him. "Philip!" he cried in surprise. "You are Philip Dobney, are you not?" He dismounted and stuck a hand out in greeting to his friend. Philip Dobney laughed and shook the hand extended to him heartily. "A bit older, a little stouter, but in essentials still me. Of course, you remember my wife Lucy." Patrick tipped his hat and smiled. "I remember Miss Tolson, but I have never met Mrs. Dobney, although I had heard that Philip had been fortunate enough to secure himself a bride." "It is I who am the fortunate one," Lucy replied with a smile as she leaned into Philip's arm. "You did hear the whole story, did you not?" While one of Lucy's hands was tucked in the crook of her husband's arm, the other rested on her rather round belly. It seemed his old friends were soon to become parents. A pang of jealousy shot through Patrick. 4 years ago he had hoped to be as fortunate as Philip currently was. If she had stayed true to her word, he could have been a father by now. "I did," Patrick replied. "Or, at least, I believe I did. My mother was an excellent correspondent, and my brother was only slightly less good. However, I am unaware if there were any bits and pieces they left out. Allow me to extend my sympathy on the passing of your father, late though it is in coming." His mother had told him how Lucy's father had died, leaving his estate to his brother, a good-for-nothing sort of fellow, and how Lucy had struck a bargain with Philip to be his wife, rather than endure life with her uncle. The story had not ended there. There had been much that followed that, a twisted, sordid sort of tale that he had had a hard time believing was capable of playing out in the sleepy town of Kimpton. "Philip and I would be delighted to share the whole of it with you over tea at some point if you wish," Lucy replied. "The Lord has been good to us." "I can see that," Patrick answered. The pair before him looked as happy as any couple he had ever seen. "Good can come out of tragedy," Lucy continued, looking at Patrick with that pointed look he remembered so well. Lucy Tolson had often used that look when she had something to say, but was too gentle to say it bluntly. She apparently expected some good to come from his current situation. He hoped she was right, for his life for the past 4 years had been good, but it had never been truly happy. "Our condolences on the passing of both your mother and brother," she added. It is not a happy event that has returned you to us, but we are glad to have you back." "Indeed we are," Philip said eagerly. "You will find much changed around here." "I am certain I will," Patrick agreed. "But do not let us keep you from your journey," Lucy said. "I am not certain anyone expects you to arrive at Ashmore tonight." There was a sparkle to her eyes as if she knew something he did not. "I am entirely too impatient to see the place," Patrick replied. "Is there anything I should know before I arrive at home?" Home. He drew and released a breath at the word. It felt right to finally be at home. The sparkle in Lucy's eye did not fade as she shook her head. "Not a thing. I think you will find it relatively unchanged and ready to receive you." Her lips pursed as if she was attempting to contain a smile. There was likely some surprise waiting for him at Ashmore, and Lucy had probably had a hand in it. He would not press her for the details. He would simply ride home and enjoy whatever it was that awaited him. Then tell her about his delight the next time he saw her. "Well then, I suppose I will be on my way." "Welcome home," Philip said, giving Patrick's hand one more firm shake before allowing him to mount his horse and ride away. It was not an excessively long ride to Ashmore. The roads were good for this time of year, and the lack of clouds in the sky meant that, even though the moon was not full, there was still ample light to illuminate his way. Patrick was grateful for that. For though he was confident he could have made the journey in the dark of a new moon, it was reassuring to be able to see familiar landmarks along the way, and know that he had not forgotten as much as he feared he might have over the past 4 years. "Can I be of service?" a groom asked as he exited the stables at Patrick's approach. "Master Patrick," the man said in surprise, as he lifted his lantern high to see to whom it was he spoke. "We did not expect you until tomorrow." He leaned to the side and looked behind Patrick. "Is there a carriage?" "No, it is just me. The rest will arrive tomorrow as planned." Patrick slid off his horse. "It is good to see you, John." "We are pleased to have you return," the groom replied, before turning and shouting, "It's the master," to a fellow groom just exiting the stables. "Come, take his horse." "I see you still run a tight ship," Patrick said with a chuckle. "John's not too harsh a master, is he?" he asked, as he relinquished the reins he held to the lad, who had scampered at John's barking to do as he was told. "No, sir, he is right kind." "And who might you be?" Patrick asked. "I be Henry, sir." "Have you been with us long?" "No, sir, only 2 months." 2 months. Not long enough to have been here when his brother Frederick was. Henry must be one of the replacements for the men who were lost with Frederick and his mother in the accident. "And a good hand he is," John said. "He's taken up well where others left off." So he was correct. This young lad, who looked to be no more than 14, had come to Ashmore after the accident. "I am glad to hear it." He gave a nod to the lad and allowed him to continue with his work instead of standing there waiting for Patrick to question him further. "It is good to have you home, sir," John repeated, a smile gracing his face for a moment before sobering. "Not for the reasons it was necessary, of course." "No one ever wishes to be called home for such a reason." Patrick turned and looked toward the house. "I had hoped to eventually return to my family with tales of adventure." He shook his head. "I have the tales. It's just the family I lack." "I've always got a ready ear," John said quietly. "I know it is not the same, but until you have formed a new family, my ear is available." Patrick clapped the older man on the shoulder. John had been at Ashmore for at least 15 years. He was as much part of the estate family as anyone. "You're a good man, John, and I might take you up on that offer at some point." He clapped his hands and rubbed them together eagerly with an impish smile on his face. "Now, do you wish to go with me when I surprise Mrs. White?" John chuckled. "No, I shall stay here where it is safe." "Lacking bravery, are you?" Patrick teased. "I assure you I have courage aplenty. I just am not lacking in good sense. I like my meals without crosswords and harsh glares. I'll have no part of taking the blame for your tampering with Mrs. White's schedule." Patrick laughed. "I am no stranger to her displeasure, but I see your point. Wish me well." When he was young, Patrick had often found many ways to torment the housekeeper. He would move things from place to place, steal a key when it was within his reach, and stamp his boots inside the door rather than making use of the brush outside. He had eventually nearly outgrown such impishness before he left home, and then the past 4 years had driven out the rest. However, now that he was home and no longer under the command of another, he felt a bit of that carefree boy returning. Coming upon the garden, Patrick decided to take a walk through it before entering the house. As much as he was eager to be inside where it was warm, a part of him dreaded the change that would be so evident by the silence of the place when he did enter. There would be no one to greet him aside from servants. He approached the doors that led from the library to what had been his mother's favourite part of the garden. A light dusting of snow covered the tops of bushes and bare branches. He stood and looked at them for a few minutes, pondering how they seemed to reflect his own state of being. Cold, barren, and waiting. Waiting for what? That was the question. Patrick had no idea what awaited him now. Oh, he knew he would run the estate as well as it could be run. And come next winter, he would venture to town to attempt to secure a bride, so that he could do his part to provide a son or two who could continue to care for Ashmore when he was gone. However, beyond those things, and because of those things, he felt very unsure of himself. He looked at the house, his home, the place that was now his responsibility. He would do his best by it. The glass panes in the library doors were painted with the intricate white designs of Jack Frost and his legion of pixies. Those designs, his mother had said, were a reminder to Patrick that even in the coldest of winter weather, and at the darkest time of the year, there was still beauty to be found. It sounded very much like what Lucy had said to him earlier about beauty being found in tragedy. Once again, he hoped that something good could be found in all of this. He sighed and walked closer to the doors where he traced one of the patterns left by the frost. As he did, the room before him lit with the soft glow of one candle, and then another and another. Every ounce of breath he had in his lungs escaped him in a great whoosh as the lighter of the candles came into view. It was her. There, illuminated by the glow of the candle she held, and framed by the soft and delicate designs of the frost on the window panes of the library doors, was Amanda, looking every bit as beautiful as he remembered her. Chapter 2. Amanda Thompson moved lightly around the library, placing the book she carried on a table near Patrick's favourite chair, checking the shelves, and straightening anything that she decided was out of place, while Patrick stood transfixed, rooted to the frozen ground beneath his feet. He had known that eventually they would have to meet, but he had hoped it would not be for some time. Dealing with the newness of his recently acquired position in life, while grieving anew the loss of his family, would be difficult enough, without being reminded of his shortcomings by the lady who had tossed him aside, crushing his heart with her refusal, a heart which still longed for her all these years later. He had attempted to find someone else to take her place in his affections, but it was a fruitless, frustrating business. No one had ever laughed as she did. None had smiled quite like her. Not a single young lady he had met had been able to converse with him on things which he held dear as she used to do. She approached the doors, most likely to check the lock and draw the drapes across, to help keep the chill of the night from entering the room. Her lips formed an O as her eyes grew wide, and she stopped mid-stride when she saw him. Patrick jiggled the door handle. It was locked as expected. He could dash around the house and enter through the door, but then there would be servants to greet and such. Amanda, the lady about whom he had dreamt for 4 years, was here, and though it was surprising and unsettling to see her so directly upon arriving, he had no wish to allow her to escape before he could hear her voice in reality, instead of just in his dreams. Therefore, he gave the door handle another jiggle and motioned for her to open it for him. She looked behind her, causing him to think that perhaps she would ignore his request, but she did not. "Mr. Mullins," she greeted as she opened the door to him. "Miss Thompson," he replied, stepping into his home and closing the door behind him. It felt odd to hear her name falling from his lips in a tone that was not a painful whisper. It was almost as odd a sensation as standing here in this room, of all places, with her was. "We had not expected you until tomorrow." She stepped aside and away from him. "I wish to sleep in my own bed," he answered. He drew in a breath and looked around the room. He could hear noises from somewhere in the house, yet it still seemed so silent. "It is not the same, is it?" she asked quietly. "We had hoped to help, at least a little, by making certain everything was just as your mother and brother would have liked it." She dipped her head. "I'm very sorry that they are not here to greet you." "No more than I am," he replied. "Oh, Patrick." Her hand rested on her heart, and her eyes glistened with unshed tears. He looked past her to whatever stood behind her, not that he was in fact looking at anything in particular. He just could not look at her. for he longed to wrap her in his embrace and feel some sort of comfort. "Who is we?" he asked as he began to remove his outerwear. "Your friends, at least. I hope that I can still be part of that group." He smiled tightly and nodded. This must be the surprise Lucy had known he would find. "We must begin somewhere, I suppose," he answered, "and friends seems to be as good a place to start as anywhere." Having removed his outerwear, he draped it across a nearby chair and began a slow circuit of the small room. "Surely you're not here alone?" He cast a questioning look in her direction. "No, Mother is in the housekeeper's room. She wanted to make certain that you would not need to trouble yourself with menu selections for at least 2 weeks. Amanda turned in her spot, following him with her eyes, as he moved around the room. "Was your voyage good?" she asked. Patrick took a book from the shelf and paged through it. He had no clue as to what book he held. He just needed something other than her on which to focus. "It was not terrible, cold, windy, and wet, but we encountered no major storms and had very few days of poor weather. I'm glad to hear it." The room fell into an awkward silence. Patrick glanced at her as he returned the book to the shelf. There was plenty he wished to say, but little he felt he should. "You're probably anxious to get settled into your room." She moved toward the door. "I will tell Mrs. White that you will require some tea and supper." "Are you married?" he blurted before she could leave the room. He half hoped she would say she was. Then he would have to tell his heart that all was lost, instead of allowing it to contemplate a second chance with her. "What? No." She turned toward him. "Neither my brother nor my mother had mentioned anything about a wedding. But then, they did not." His voice trailed off as he shrugged. "They did not speak of me?" He shook his head. "Why should they?" He tried to keep his tone friendly, but from the way she recoiled, he knew he had not succeeded. "Why should they not?" she replied. "We have known each other since we were born. Our families have always been close. Even while you were away, we still gathered as we used to do." "Indeed? Did your mother never mention it?" "No, never." "She spoke often enough about you." Amanda folded her arms and tipped her head as she glared at him. "Painfully often," she added. "I do not see how a mention of me could cause you pain." He pressed his lips together. He had not meant to say that, nor had he intended to feel bitterness rising within him. He thought he had overcome that. "Forgive me. I believe my journey has tired me more than I thought. I should see myself to my room." To his surprise, he saw a spark of fury in her eyes. She was angry at him. She had no reason to be put out with him. "Please do not let me detain you," she said with a wave toward the door. His brow furrowed. Her tone was indeed angry. "Just do not remain there for 4 years," she snapped, before throwing the door open and exiting hastily. He rushed after her. "What do you mean by that?" "Is that not what you did the last time we talked in the library? You decided our conversation was over, and that was it. I never heard from you, or saw you again, until today." Tears glistened in her eyes. "I tried to write to you, but Mother would not allow it." The mention of her mother not permitting something was more than he could countenance. Had her mother not interfered 4 years ago, Amanda might have been his. The bitterness that had started to rise before surfaced in all its ugly glory. "There is not much to discuss. When the lady to whom you have offered your heart recants her decision because you are not good enough for her." He shook his head. "I was wrong. It may not be possible for us to remain friends. Miss Thompson, I thank you for the effort you have put into my homecoming. It is not unappreciated, but I find I must go." And with that and a bow, he left her, staring wide-eyed and open-mouthed after him. Patrick slowed his pace when he reached the top of the stairs. Slowly he walked down the hall, pausing for a moment in front of the doors to what had been his mother's and brother's rooms, to remember each of them in turn. Naturally, sadness filled him as he stood in front of each door, but the exercise was necessary. A wily enemy such as grief had to be faced. For what soldier claimed victory over his enemy? By hiding. From the bitterness which had sprung up within him so quickly when speaking with Amanda, Patrick knew the answer to that question quite well. He had hidden from his disappointment for some time. No, that was not entirely true. He had hidden, but he had not just hidden. He had fled the field, retreating to what he thought would be a safe distance, only to find reminders of his disappointment in every fair-haired beauty or happily married couple. He crossed from the door of his room to the writing desk that stood in front of the window and lit the lamp. She sat there when she wrote to you. He turned to find Mrs. Thompson at his door. He had little desire to see her since he still held her in his mind as the source of his unhappy single state. Your mother was writing that letter before she left for town. She indicated the paper that he had picked up from the desk. It did not make sense to send it to you after what happened. You and it would have likely crossed paths and been headed in opposite directions. So I left it where she had. I knew you would want to read it. Indeed, after reading it myself, I knew you needed to read it. Mrs. Thompson took a seat on the trunk which stood at the end of Patrick's bed. Go ahead, read it. Now? She nodded. I would allow you some time and privacy, but my daughter is once again weeping because of you, and I am feeling uncharitable. Amanda is crying? He asked in surprise. He knew he had been harsh, but he had not expected her to dissolve into tears over a repetition of what she had said to him 4 years ago when rejecting him. Weeping, not crying, Mrs. Thompson corrected. Now read. Patrick did as instructed. I will not allow her to pine away for another year. She's 24 and soon will be firmly on the shelf, Mrs. Thompson said, as Patrick read similar words from his mother. She blew out a breath. We had all hoped you would come to your senses before now. Patrick looked up from the letter. Come to my senses? About what? About the fact that you were too young to marry 4 years ago, Mrs. Thompson answered. Patrick pulled out the chair next to the desk and sank into it. I do not follow your meaning. You had no career, only the promise of one, and therefore no income and no way to support a wife and child in a fashion that would provide comfort to them. That is why I counselled Amanda to not accept your offer until you had become better established. Patrick felt as if he had taken a blow to the abdomen. Amanda said that I was not capable of being a good husband. He sank back into his chair. That was all he had heard. He was not good enough. If there had been any further explanation, he had not listened to it. She also told you that she knew you would succeed in whatever you chose to do, Mrs. Thompson added. Had she? Patrick searched his memory. There it was. A mumbled jumble of words that had followed her proclamation that he was not worthy of her. I thought she was attempting to be kind in sending me on my way. Mrs. Thompson rose and crossed to where he sat. Laying her hand on his shoulder, she said, We knew that you had not heard things as you should have when you came flying out of the library that night, but I was certain that in the morning, when your disappointment had faded some, you would be able to hear what was being said. However, before Amanda and I could call on you the following day, you were gone. Why did you not write? He looked up at her. The agony that could have been saved if someone had told him this information 4 years ago. That was perhaps a mistake on our part. He shook his head in bewilderment. That was saying it gently. You had asked your mother not to mention Amanda to you. We, your mother and I, thought that eventually you would ask about her, and then we would broach the subject. 4 years. She nodded sadly. You always were obstinate. He shook his head again. For 4 years his mother and Mrs. Thompson had withheld this information from him. I both longed and dreaded to hear about her, he said. Because of my dread, I never asked. Then you do still love her? I have attempted not to, he admitted. Yes, your mother mentioned several of the accounts that you shared about this or that young lady. Somehow, each one always was wanting for one reason or another. They were not Amanda. The confession was barely more than a whisper, but it was the truth. It had always been the truth. No matter what reason he gave for why he could not pursue a lady, it always came back to this fact. None of them could compare to his Amanda. Mrs. Thompson crossed to the door and turned to look at him. I'm not leaving this house until you and my daughter have spoken. Even if I have to stay all night, I will not risk having you disappear again. Then she turned and left him. Chapter 3. Patrick sat, staring at his open door for some time. He read and reread the few paragraphs of the letter his mother had been writing to him just before she died. Why now? Why had his mother not attempted to share some of this information with him before now? He tossed the letter on the desk. It was true. He had asked her not to tell him about Amanda. But it was not as if she could not have slipped something in before now, if she truly felt, as this letter said, overwhelmed with the grief that his losing the lady who held his heart would bring him. He had not suddenly asked her about Amanda, and yet she was writing to him about her. She could have ignored his request 3 years ago, but she did not. She had only done it now, when she knew that Amanda would soon choose a husband and would never be his. He shook his head and scowled at that letter. Now was not even the first time that Amanda had almost been forever lost to him. According to his mother, Amanda had received an offer last year. Yet, his mother had not written to him about that. There was only one reason that his confused and distraught mind could give for his mother never mentioning any of this to him before now, Mrs. Thompson. It had to be that Amanda's mother had not yet approved of him. He rose and paced a circuit of the room. What had Mrs. Thompson said about that letter? After she read it, she knew he needed to read it. Of course she did. His mother's words would be far more persuasive in putting Amanda forward to him than Mrs. Thompson's would be. And apparently now, thanks to the death of his brother, Patrick was finally acceptable. He was an estate owner after all, and not just a mere second son, attempting to find his way in the world through some lowly profession. He blew out a frustrated breath and shook his head. He was only an estate owner, if he chose to keep Ashmore Lodge. And at the moment he was not certain he cared to retain it, or anything that would remind him of Amanda. There was only one thing to do. He must go speak with Amanda. It was the only way he was going to rid his house of his mother's conniving friend. Then he would drown his sorrows in a bottle of something, write a letter to his brother's solicitor regarding the disposal of his inheritance, and prepare the staff to accept a new master, one who did not bear the name Mullins. Patrick descended the stairs and took 2 steps toward the library before retreating to the portrait gallery. As he walked along the length of the room, he stopped now and then to remember who the relations were who were staring back at him. It would be difficult to disappoint so many generations of Mullins, but what else was he to do? He could not stay here where he would be forced to see her. He would do a fine job of remembering how unworthy he was, without the constant reminder. He moved slowly, deliberately, reverently, from one ancestor to the next, until he came to the last portrait, the one of himself with his brother and their parents. As tears gathered in his eyes at the sight of the family he had lost, he attempted to push them aside by recalling just how tiring it had been to sit for that portrait, and how his dear mother had borne his impatience so well, how he missed her. This portrait would most certainly accompany him to his new home, wherever that should be. He turned and shook his head as he looked back down the gallery. He had hoped that this would be his home, that one day he would add a painting of his own family to this wall. But with a final sigh and a sharp pang of regret in his heart, he resigned himself to parting with Ashmore, and disappointing all these ancestors whose likenesses hung here. "I had heard you had returned," said Mrs. White, joining him in the gallery, a day early, I might add. Patrick tucked his morose mood away as best he could and chuckled at her teasing scold. He could tell she was not entirely put out to see him ahead of schedule. "I have always been impatient, have I not?" "Oh, indeed," his housekeeper agreed most readily, as they stood in front of the painting of Patrick's family. "But then, so was your father." She turned her head to look at him. "And yet he was as fine a master as I ever had. I suspect you will be very much like him." Patrick pressed his lips together, thinking better of what he wished to say. He could not disappoint her now, not so soon after just arriving. "Thank you," he muttered instead, before excusing himself to do what he did not wish to do, but felt must be done. "Miss Thompson," he said as he entered the library. She was sitting in his favourite chair, looking toward the garden doors, which were now hidden behind heavy drapes. It would be so easy for him to throw himself at her feet and ask her to be his, but he could not, for he had no desire to be accepted for his inheritance, and nothing else. "Your mother has insisted that we speak to one another," he continued, clasping his hands behind his back, and standing as if he were giving an account to his colonel about some duty that had been completed. "However, I do not see a great need for a long, drawn-out discussion." He faltered as she turned toward him, and he saw her tear-stained face. He dropped his gaze to look at the arm of the chair instead of her, and willed his heart to stay strung together in some fashion, rather than crumbling as it wished to do. "I must apologize for causing you pain, but it is for your own good." He shook his head and turned from her. Those were nearly the same words she had said to him 4 years ago, and it hurt his heart as much now to say them, as it had to hear them all that time ago. "I will not be staying at Ashmore Lodge, so I fear I'm not an acceptable choice for one such as yourself." There. He had said it, and it sounded as hideous spoken aloud as it did when just a thought. His shoulders sagged, nearly unable to bear up under the strain of the task he had set before himself. "Go to town as you planned," he said. "Find a husband worthy of you, one who will please your mother. I have never been, and never will be, that man." Some of the anger from earlier began to return, and his shoulders lifted. This was for the best. Supposing he had command of his sensibilities, he turned toward her and bowed. "I thank you, once again, for preparing the house so well for my return. I do regret that I will not be staying longer than the few weeks necessary, to see that all is in order to dispense of the estate." With that he left the room. It was cowardly of him not to give her an opportunity to respond, and he knew it. However, one did not stand around waiting for the enemy to retaliate when making a sneak attack, especially when one felt as vulnerable to surrender as he did within the intimacy of the dimly lit library. Exposing one's weakness was not among the lessons taught in how to win a battle. One made his strike, and moved on to what needed to be done next. He could contemplate casualties and other such things when the campaign was over. For now he needed to focus on his next objective of informing Mrs. Thompson that he had done as she requested. He had spoken to her daughter. "Mrs. Thompson." She looked up at him from where she sat near the hearth in the sitting room. "Have you spoken to Amanda already?" He nodded. "I have. You will wish to take her home, where she can recover from her disappointment in the comfort of familiar surroundings." "I beg your pardon?" Mrs. Thompson looked at him aghast. "I am not keeping Ashmore Lodge, Mrs. Thompson, and therefore I will not be pursuing your daughter, as I will not be the proper sort of husband she deserves." It was much easier to speak of these things to Mrs. Thompson without his heart threatening to shatter, for the very sight of her aroused his disgust at having been tossed aside, only to be picked up again when what he possessed matched her desires for her daughter. "What do you mean you are not keeping Ashmore Lodge?" Patrick turned to find a wild-eyed Amanda at the door to the sitting room. "Just that," he said, as calmly as one could when faced on two sides by displeased women. "I am not keeping Ashmore. I am selling it. I had not thought to, but then, once I got here, I realized it would be for the best." "For the best?" Amanda nearly shouted. "For whose best?" He swallowed. "For mine." The only thing about giving up his home that was for his best was that it would allow him to live in some distant location, far away from where he would have to be reminded of her and the family she would have. "For Ashmore's," he added. "How is it best for either you or the estate?" Amanda stomped toward him. "This place has been in your family for generations." "Your mother would be disappointed," Mrs. Thompson added from her seat near the fire. Her words turned his thoughts from sweeping Amanda into his arms and assuring her he would not leave to something more suiting to his purpose: bitterness. "Yes, I will have to live with that knowledge," he said, turning toward Mrs. Thompson, while still keeping a watch on her daughter. "But then I am used to living with regret. I have had 4 years to practice, so adding my mother's displeasure to what I already carry should not be too difficult a thing to do. There is always the hope, I suppose, if I continue my career as an officer, that one of the skirmishes into which I am flung will rid me of the ability to feel regret. Not that I was so fortunate up to now." That seemed to quell some of the anger he saw in Amanda's eyes, while causing her mother to look horrified. Apparently neither of them knew what destruction they had caused in his life. "What do you mean you have not been fortunate?" Amanda asked. "I am still alive," he replied flatly. He had never entered battle wishing to die some painful death at the end of a bayonet, or from a musket's or cannon's ball, but there were moments when that pain had seemed more welcome than the pain he faced in remembering her. "You wish to die?" Amanda moved toward a chair, her hand out in front of her as if she needed to feel her way to it. "Often," he whispered. She sank down onto the edge of the chair. "Because of me?" He gave a sharp nod of his head. "But I wished more to see my mother again than to die, so I did my best to not be killed. However, now, well, there is not much reason left, is there?" He turned away from her as she dissolved into tears, crossed to the window, and stared out into the blackness. "No wonder you hate me," she said. "I do not hate you," he said, without turning toward her. "I love you as much now as I did 4 years ago." "But I sent you away." He shook his head. "No, your mother sent me away. It was her persuasion that did the job of parting me from both my mother and you." "You did not have to sail to the Canadas," Mrs. Thompson cried. "You could have studied the law or taken orders." He laughed bitterly and turned from the window, and be near enough to watch another more acceptable choice court and win the desire of my heart. He shook his head. "I could not then, and I will not now. The Canadas are not so dreadful a place. Parts are actually quite civilized." Mrs. Thompson rose from her seat and approached him. "But if you love her, why do you not attempt to win her?" "Because she does not love me," he replied. "But I do," Amanda cried. "I have for years." Sorrow overwhelmed him as he shook his head. "I wish I could believe that." "Why do you not?" Amanda asked. "Why did your mother wish for me to read the letter left by my mother?" Amanda's brow furrowed. "Perhaps because it was from your mother. It was her last words to you." He turned toward the window again. "I also wish I could believe that, but I do not." How he wished he could just believe that both Amanda and Mrs. Thompson welcomed him for him, and not for his estate. Of Amanda's love, he could more readily convince his heart, because he longed with every fibre of his being to be loved by her. "Then what reason do you give it?" There was no mistaking the anger in Mrs. Thompson's voice. "I am now acceptable. My brother has died, and I am now acceptable. What greater feat would there be than to secure your daughter as the mistress of an estate so near to your home?" He shrugged. "It is brilliant manoeuvring. However, I do not wish to be a pawn in some game. If you will excuse me, I've had a long day. I will not be fleeing Ashmore in the middle of the night, so you may attempt to work on me at some later time if you choose. However, if you do not, I will understand." He bowed to Amanda. "I wish you well in your season. I hope you can find someone who is truly worthy of you." How many times had he fled her presence now? He was not certain he wished to keep count, for with each removal from her presence his heart crumbled a little more. If only he could be assured of her love for him, if only he could see himself as worthy of her, because of who he was, and not because of an inheritance that had been thrust upon him, then, then, he might finally find happiness. Chapter 4. "Good morning, sir," Mrs. White greeted Patrick as he passed her, on his way to the breakfast room. "I believe you will find several choices to your liking." She entered the room behind him. "You will see the cook has not forgotten your favourites." Indeed, there were several items of food that he favoured sitting on the table, near where his brother had always sat and his father before him. It should be his place now, but it would not be. Therefore, he moved the place setting to the first chair on the left. This is where he belonged. He was not claiming Ashmore. He did not deserve to sit in the place of its master. Mrs. White arched a brow and wore a look of displeasure at his choice of seats. He shifted his eyes to his plate as he sat down, and prepared to pour himself a cup of tea. He did not need Mrs. White's reproving looks to make him feel as lowly as a drunk, passed out in the alleyway behind the Rose and Crown. He had spent a great deal of the night pondering how he was failing his family and the staff. "Was there something you needed, Mrs. White?" He had no desire to have her watch him not eat what had been explicitly prepared with him in mind. He was both grateful and touched by the remembrance of what he preferred, and the effort to make his return feel more like a grand arrival, rather than a necessity of tragedy. However, he had very little desire to do more than drink a cup of tea. His appetite was gone, and having her standing before him, looking stern, was not helping it to return. Before she could reply, there was a clattering in the corridor, followed by a very feminine blast. "Who is that?" Patrick asked Mrs. White. He suspected he knew precisely who it was. Amanda had always favoured saying blast, when things did not go as planned, or she dropped one item or another. "We have guests." Patrick held Mrs. White's gaze, which did not waver. Was she going to tell him who his guests were, or was she just going to stand there, looking very much as his tutor had when the man discovered Patrick had hidden his ink? As the sound of a discussion in the hall entered the breakfast room, his housekeeper finally spoke again. Mrs. Thompson and her daughter stayed the night. I believe Mrs. Thompson is leaving now, but Miss Thompson will remain for the time being. I did not think you would mind if I lent them a few of your mother's items for sleeping, so that their clothing could be presentable today. He stared at her open-mouthed as she walked toward the door. He was correct. That blast had been from Amanda. But why was she here and not leaving? I could not turn Miss Thompson out when she was in the state that she was in last evening after you retired to your room. Mrs. White stood mere feet from the door. The last time I saw her looking so distressed was 4 years ago. She tipped her head and raised a brow once again. I know I overstepped my bounds, sir, but seeing as I shall not be in your employ for long, I find the overstep does not bother me so very much. He did not miss her meaning. She knew that he was not staying, and she was a great deal less than pleased. In fact, he was quite certain she was as angry as he had ever seen her. However, before he could plead that he was going to speak to her this morning, she continued. 4 years ago, that young lady nearly died. Patrick blinked. Amanda? Amanda had almost died? You will be polite to her, and see to it that she eats. It was her lack of eating from the distress she felt at your hasty departure that made her susceptible to the illness, which almost took her from us. You may remove yourself from those who care about you, for I assure you that many of us who have watched you grow over the years hold you in a special place in our hearts. But I, for one, will not tolerate your boyish behaviour causing us to lose Miss Thompson. She and her family have been a delight to serve when they visit. With that and a fierce glare, Mrs. White did what Patrick was so adept at doing, and left the room without giving him a moment to gather his thoughts and speak. Patrick was still attempting to sort through what he had just heard when the second wave of attack entered the room, looking beautiful, despite the dark circles that hung under her eyes. He pushed to his feet. Good morning, Miss Thompson. Is it good, Mr. Mullins? Her reply was cool, like the edge of a knife. It appeared she had not lost her sharp tongue in 4 years. It is what one says. One says much that one does not mean. She gave him a pointed look as she took the chair across from him, and waited for a footman to bring her what she needed to eat. I should like to know what you mean by that, but Mrs. White has given me specific orders to remain polite and to see that you eat. He pushed a basket of muffins toward her. If he remembered correctly, a cup of tea and a muffin were her preference for breaking her fast. Her lips tipped up at the corners as she took one of the muffins from the basket. Are you not eating? She asked, looking at his empty plate. He shook his head. I do not think I could if I tried. One should probably try so that one might prove the veracity of one's thoughts. He shook his head and returned the smile she gave him. Very well, I will try. He took a muffin, broke off a bit of it, and popped it into his mouth. It tasted of lightness and home for a moment, until he remembered that he was not home, and had to reach for his tea to wash down the ash the muffin had become. I was correct. He pushed his plate away from him. I am sorry to hear it. Ashmore's cook usually produces very tasty food. She took a nibble of her muffin. It is not the quality of the food that is amiss. No? Then what is it? His eyes narrowed as she batted her lashes innocently. She knew exactly what was amiss. I do not wish to leave Ashmore. Then do not leave. She put her muffin down and looked him in the eye, begging him to debate with her. I must not argue. Mrs. White would not be pleased. She's not pleased that you're leaving, so in for a penny, in for a pound, as it were. Amanda leaned back with her cup of tea. He shook his head. I was going to tell her this morning. Amanda shrugged one shoulder and sipped her tea, waiting for him to continue. Mrs. White said you were staying with us for some time. She nodded and smiled. How long are you planning to remain at Ashmore? She shook her head and placed her cup on the table. I believe you said you would be here for the few weeks it took to complete the disposal of your inheritance or some such thing, so I cannot tell you more precisely than what you have told me. However, it would be greatly appreciated if you would give me at least a day's warning before we are to relocate to wherever it is we're going. Patrick reached for his tea, hoping that a sip of it would help his heart return to where it belonged, instead of blocking his throat and hammering in his ears. She was planning to leave with him. She smiled, broke off the tiniest bit of muffin and rose from her seat. "You have not finished eating." Those were not the words he really wished to say, but in a panic he blurted whatever he had to so that she would not quit the room until she had explained herself. "I am not leaving." She had come around the table to where he sat and patted him on the shoulder, before continuing down the length of the room to the windows at its far end. "The frost fairies were busy last night," she said, glancing back to where he sat. "Their decorations are so beautiful in the first light of morning. See how they sparkle?" The frosty designs on the window were not the only thing to sparkle. The sun glinted off the copper of her hair and framed her face in light. "Are the designs as beautiful in Canada?" She beckoned for him to join her at the window. He shook his head. She was not going to let him ignore her. "I have sketches of a few," he answered. "I would like to see them." She sighed. "It is a pity you had to transport all your things to England, only to have to return them to Canada when you leave again. We are going to Canada, are we not? It sounded as though that was what you planned when you spoke to Mother and me last night." At the risk of starting an argument and incurring more of the wrath of Mrs. White, "Why do you keep saying we are going?" he asked. She blew on the window, allowing it to fog up with her breath, then with a finger traced a heart in it. "My mother disapproves of me writing on the window like this." "Your mother disapproves of many things. He was one of those things." "Not so much as she used to." Amanda blew on the window again, before tracing another heart on the pane. "She has agreed to allow me to go to Canada with you. She was not happy about it, but I would not be moved." I reminded her that you have established yourself in a profession just as she required 4 years ago before giving me her blessing to marry. Never had she once mentioned that you must live close to Kimpton or Lambton, or anywhere in Derbyshire for that matter. If you had taken up a different profession, I would have been moved to wherever it was that you practiced law or found a parish. She turned toward him. "I do not care where you live, or what you are, as long as you are my husband. I will not live another day with my heart torn in half. I will not, Patrick. I simply will not." Patrick shook his head and blinked. He turned toward the window and then back toward her. Was she saying what he thought she was saying? "Mother has gone home to prepare my things for travel. Later today she will, of course, send what I need for my stay here, but the rest should be crated up and delivered to Ashmore before you have made all the arrangements necessary to sell the place. I can help you with anything that needs to be organised or listed or the like." She was talking rapidly as she did when she was nervous. "I don't know what tasks the selling of a home entails, but I am a quick learner and need only to be instructed. Then, when Mr. Dobney has called the banns, we shall marry, and everything will be all properly ready for our departure. No, not quite. Mother has a sister in town who is rattling about her townhouse, and either she can come to live with Mother, or Mother can go to live with her." She blew once more on the window and began to make another heart. "Then all shall be ready, as soon as Mother is settled with someone to keep her company." He saw her lips quiver and she blinked rapidly. She was willing to leave all that she knew and loved for him, no matter what his profession. No matter if he owned an estate or not, she was choosing him. And while the thought elated him, it also made him feel quite small for having questioned her motives. He grasped the hand that was closest to him. "You still wish to marry me? After all these years? After last night?" She nodded. "I am foolish like that." He smiled. Anyone else would have said a simple yes, but not his sharp-tongued Amanda. She would remind him of his idiocy while still accepting him. "I have never intended not to marry you," she added. "But my mother was right 4 years ago. We were not truly ready to marry. How would you have supported me, let alone a child? It was imprudent to think that we could survive on just the interest from my dowry and your allowance." She took his other hand and they stood facing each other. "That is what I attempted to tell you, but you did not hear me." She blinked against tears, but one escaped and slid down her cheek. "All you heard was my rejection. I could see it in your eyes. I have seen it in your eyes so many times when I have closed mine. Please say you will have me, and that I have not driven you away forever. Will you have me even if I do not sell Ashmore? Only if you believe me when I say that I would have you even without it. I wish only to be by your side wherever you are." Her lips tipped up on one side. "I do require now, as I did 4 years ago, that we be able to live comfortably enough to feed and house our children, and employ a servant or two, because to begin a family with less would, in my opinion, be imprudent, he finished, as is selling my inheritance, if there is no reason to escape the pain of seeing you wed to another. He drew and released a breath that took from him the last remnants of the heaviness, which had settled into his soul upon realizing yesterday that he must leave both Ashmore and Amanda. I am likely not good enough for you, but if you will have me, and if you will be content to be the mistress of Ashmore, then I shall daily endeavour to prove myself worthy of you. Will you forgive me for my foolishness and agree to be my wife? For I, like you, have no desire to live my life with half a heart, and mine needs you to be complete. She dropped his hands and turned toward the window where she blew on the glass, traced a heart in the fog, and quickly scrawled yes before the vapour vanished. When she turned toward him, he pulled her into his arms. His heart beat wildly in his chest. From tragedy and the deepest cold hopelessness that a soul could feel had arisen something of great beauty, something that he did not deserve, something that he would cherish for all time. I love you, Amanda. He pulled back to smile down at her. I have always loved you for as long as I can remember, even when I was pulling your hair and teasing you with frogs, and I will love you for infinitely longer. She reached a hand up to stroke his cheek. Until the frost fairies forget to paint on the window panes of Ashmore in the winter. He looked up toward the ceiling. It was excessively unmanly to cry, but even rolling his eyes upward or blinking could not keep his tears from falling. Even longer than that, he answered. Then he captured her lips with his and attempted to pour every ounce of his love into that kiss. 4 years of separation overtook them. His hands roamed up and down her back hungrily, tugging her closer and closer to him, while her hands knotted themselves in his hair, holding him so that he could not help but kiss her long and deep as their lips parted and their tongues tangled. She was delicious, and she was his. Finally she was his. He broke their kiss and rested his forehead on hers. You should not stay here until we are married. There was no way he was going to make it to the altar without anticipating his vows, if she remained under the same roof as him. As it was likely going to be a difficult battle during the day when she was visiting. I was serious about never being parted from you again, she replied. I am not leaving. I do not trust myself, he admitted. If we are alone. She kissed his lips lightly, and he saw a spark of amusement in her eyes. My mother does not trust you either, so she will also be staying here until we marry. Patrick groaned. He would have to speak to Philip to see how quickly a license could be readied and arrangements could be made. She is not here now, Amanda said suggestively, although there are footmen present, so do not do more than kiss me. He bent his head to capture her lips again, and kissed her to the edge of his resolve. Then, once again, he rested his forehead against hers. We should speak with Mrs. White, Amanda said, and Philip and his brother Marcus are bringing some greenery, boughs and such. We intended to keep them outside the servants' entrance until next week, when we will shake the snow off them and place a few around the sitting room and dining room. She wrapped her arm around his and laid her head against his shoulder as they moved away from the window. I know it is not proper to be too festive, but I think it is what your mother would have wanted. She did so love Christmas. Oh! Her head popped up. We must also get a Yule log. He chuckled. We will do all of those things. He stopped at the table, but not until you have eaten, as per Mrs. White's orders. He kissed her forehead and then held her chair for her. I shall only eat if you do. She wrinkled her nose as she tasted her tea. We shall need fresh cups. It has grown cold. Patrick motioned to one of the footmen who was still standing at his post. Then he moved his things to the head of the table, the proper place for the master of Ashmore to take, before tucking himself into his chair and enjoying the most wonderful breakfast he had ever tasted, as he listened to Amanda tell him story upon story about all that had happened in Derbyshire while he had been gone. He was home, never to leave again. He was exactly where he was meant to be, here, with her, until the frost fairies never returned to paint another window pane in winter, or perhaps even longer. This has been Frosted Windowpanes, a Nature's Fury and Delights novelette, written by Leenie Brown narrated by Christopher, an authorised voice replica. The 2018 copyright for Frosted Windowpanes is held by Leenie Brown. All rights reserved.